Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I finally finished my front end suspension and I take this old blank canvas and turn it into a masterpiece. Let's get started. All right guys, so first thing that we're going to do is install the shock over here on the driver's side. Now, this little tab here actually corresponds to this little hole right there, and then the top goes on, and it's actually, I guess you could say it's kind of keyed. If you can see here in the middle, it's more kind of squared, but I have it oriented in the way that it needs to go on here, because once we put it in there, you can see the hose right there that's going to connect to it. It needs to be in that same fashion so it goes right on. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this top and then set it in there. I'm gonna put that 22mm bolt on and start tightening it up. All right, so that's in there, 22mm bolt on the top. And then there's a hat on both of these that kind of like wedges in and fits. You want to make sure this bottom piece here with the cushion is set properly in there and there's no room, because once this starts to tighten down, so will this. So you want to make sure that there's a nice even distribution of that bushing right there. So I'm going to go ahead and start tightening this down. And then you should start seeing all this start to compress. And as you can see, this top here where the line connects fits up perfectly with it. Fits up perfectly, so it'll sit down right on top of it just like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and start tightening down this 22mm, and then I'll come back when we're ready to torque it. As you can see, it is starting to compress that bushing that was in there. And so what you have to be careful of is, obviously the more that you tighten this bolt down, the more this nipple is going to be exposed. Now, as I said in the first video, I had to beat all this back and it gets pretty tight. So what you may have to do is this, and this is what I had to do in the first video. I made sure that the head of the ratchet was at least making contact and inside of the socket. But as you can see, it's not all the way down into the socket. So what that does is it gives that nipple a little bit of space. Now, in a perfect world, you'd like a long socket and then you wouldn't even have to worry about that. But like I said, space is limited here. So anyways, that's what I did the first time taking this stuff out. It seemed to work just fine. And that's what I did on the passenger side when I put everything back together. So that's what I'm gonna do here. I'm gonna just leave that like that, make sure that the socket makes good contact with the bolt, tighten it down as much as I can until we are ready to torque it. And I believe the torque specs on that nut is 51 foot-pounds. All right guys, so time to torque this to spec, 51 foot-pounds. If you can, get somebody to hold the base here, because once you start getting that nut close to the torque spec, this kind of wants to shift a little bit. This should hold it in place, but it's just always better to have somebody holding there. I'm gonna leave a little bit of space at the top so we're not crunching the top there. And we're just gonna torque it down. All right, that should be one click right there. I'm gonna go ahead and do it one more time just to make sure we got it. All right, that is it. So there we go, all torqued to spec, and now we can go ahead and put the line on it. And I just wanted to show you here real quickly, right here on the very bottom of this line, that is a ring. See how it kind of meets together right there? And then on top of that is an O-ring. If you were gonna replace your shock, it calls for you to replace this ring and O-ring. I'll put the diagram on the screen right now so you can see. But the old O-ring that I had in there, it was obviously hard from being in there for years and years, and that ring at the bottom was pretty brittle. So I went ahead and replaced both of those. So just know that if you're going to be replacing the shock, you know, these are like, I don't know, $1.50 parts right here. So it's just something good to do, so you get a good seal with the new shock. All right, so let's go ahead and put that on. Should hear a nice snap, and then we'll bolt it down. There you go, got a nice snap in there. I'm gonna put these 2 bolts in, and these bolts are 13 foot-pounds. All right, so that completes installation of the shock and the hydraulic line. I'm gonna go ahead and put in the upper control arm here. Now, what you're gonna have is you're gonna have these bolts that keep it in place, and these, well, that's pretty dirty. But right here, you kind of see these little markings. Let's see if we can get that. See these markings on here? So these are, I guess they call them degree shims. So in the repair manual, which I didn't read beforehand, I just took everything off. But in a perfect world, you would mark exactly where these are so you can put them back where you had them originally. I did not do that, but I am gonna put this thing under load whenever I tighten them up, seeing as how that's how the bushings are basically gonna sit majority of the time. Just one of those lessons learned. If you do this job, you know, have them marked exactly where they were initially. I don't know how big of a deal it's gonna be. Pretty much mine, we're in the same position, just up and down, kind of a neutral setting. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and throw these back in. I'm gonna snug down the bolts, but I'm not gonna torque them just yet, because like I said, I'm gonna wait till I get everything in and then put the jack underneath and kind of put it under load before I torque everything down and kind of have it probably close to the position that it's gonna be in whenever the wheels and tires are on it. Just gonna go. Kind of a snug fit. So how this is going to work is the bolt is going to go in here, and you're going to put this and the nut on the outer portion. All right, and these bolts are 19 millimeters, so we're just going to get in here. We're just going to snug these up. Alright guys, so now that the upper control arm is loosely installed, now we're going to put the lower control arm in. So this bolt right here, you're going to have to go ahead and put it in the lower control arm, and this goes to the torque arm flange. The reason you have to put it in now is because if you don't, then the mounting surface to the body is going to be right here. So there's not going to be any way to get this bolt around that. So you got to have it already in here and ready to install. Regardless if you're gonna go ahead and attach the flange or not. And then, so what I'm gonna do first, and what I found out by doing the other side, since I'm gonna do this under load, I'm not gonna attach the torsion bar flange yet. And the reason is because once the flange is up against this side here, there's a bolt that goes through here, and you have to hold the head of that bolt whenever you're torquing this down, or it'll just keep turning. That's what I found out on the other side, so I actually had to pull the flange back in order to hold that to torque it to spec under load. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. We'll see how it goes, but for right now I'm going to go ahead and put this on. I'm going to put the body bolt in here, and then the other body bolt in this side. And again, we're just going to snug them down really good until we put this thing under load and then torque them to spec. And if you follow the diagrams that it has the bolts going from the outside to the inside and the nut being on the inside of the control arm. Alright, so now that this flange, I've pushed it off the spindles here, so it should be far enough back where we can get that lower control arm in with that bolt sticking out there and not to be in the way, but we'll see. This is a super tight fit, especially trying to get that bolt in back there and being available when you're going to need it. So looks like about where we need to be. So let's see if we can get this bolt in over here. Alright, let's see if we can get this other bolt in over on this side. Alright, so this one is going to be coming from the outside in. There we go. Whew. Well, that didn't suck at all. Now you do this stuff sometimes and you question, why am I doing it? Now we have that bolt all the way across. We got a small flange bolt there in the back, and now we're going to go ahead and put this longer flange bolt. We're just going to have it in there. It's not connecting to anything, it's just going through that lower control arm, and then we'll go ahead and put the nut on it. And I'm going to tighten both those that are going through the frame. I'm going to tighten those down a little bit more, but not obviously the torque spec just yet, because again, we're going to wait till we put all this under load before we do. Alright, now I think I will go ahead and put the sway bar end link in, and then after that we can move on to putting the CV axle. Alright guys, so here we have new stabilizer end link. I think this is from Mevotech. I think that's what it's called. Anyways, we're going to install this. Going to use the old bolt from the other lower control arm. Everything is new and everything is tight, so which is great, but also sucks when you're trying to move things around. Alright, so we're going to put in the new bushing, put on the new cap, and we're just going to get this nut started. I know it's all off center, but we're just getting it started. Alright, now that that's on, let's go ahead and bring the shock down, see if we can fit that into its place and put in its bolt. Well, it went a lot better than the other side. The other side, it was horrible getting that thing in. Alright, now that that's in, let's go ahead and put in the CV axle. Alright guys, so there is where the new CV axle is going to go. So it calls for some multi-purpose grease to be put around the inner portion of the new seal. So I went ahead and did that, got that done. So go ahead and put the CV axle in. It should go in, you should feel it kind of line up with the splines, and then you're going to have to kind of give it some love taps. But I'll show you kind of how that looks here in just a second. Alright guys, so there you see where we're going to be going. So right here you have your snap ring here on this end. You're going to just push this in till you feel it line up with the splines. And then once it's lined up, we'll give it some love taps and get it in place. It feels like it is lined up in there. Let's take a look under here. Yeah, we still have a little bit of a gap. So now we're just going to get it as straight as possible. We're just going to give it some love taps. Should hear it pop right in. There you go. Nice confirmation pop there. Just check under here. Alright, it is all the way snug. The CV axle is now installed. Alright guys, so whenever I was putting this stuff back together, for some reason I did not actually tell you what I was doing when I was doing it. So here we go. Alright, so this is a bearing that goes into the steering knuckle. This is my bearing driver. So I basically got one that was a little bit larger than the bearing, and then I beat it down until it was flush with the surface of the steering knuckle. After that, you can see here that I'm going to go ahead and change it to a smaller diameter, and this fits right over top of that bearing and is able to push it down into place. So you just want to beat it down into place until you start hearing a difference in the metal, and once you hear that different sound, you're going to know that it is seated. And next up you have this, what they call a solid bushing. To me, it's just a ring that keeps the bearing in place. So you're just going to put it on top there, get it as straight as possible. I got a driver that was the same diameter and just beat it in place. And again, you're going to hear that metallic sound change once you have it fully seated. All right, so now we have to put our oil seal into the back of the steering knuckle.
So again, I just put it in there as well as I could by hand, and then used a straight wooden block with a towel underneath of it, and just banged it all the way around until it was flush around on all edges. At this time, this is the grease that I chose for my wheel bearings and every other part of this assembly, so I'm just placing it in there on the needle bearing and underneath that ring. I was pretty liberal with it since the repair manual didn't give an actual amount to put in, and then also here I'm placing it around the oil seal.
Alright, so what we're going to do now after putting that knuckle all together, just going to put some grease right here on the spindle. Now we are going to grease this spindle with a certain tool later on, but I'm just going to put some preliminary grease around here, and then we will loosely put the steering knuckle onto the CV axle. Alright, and I'm not really sure if this is or isn't a controversial thing to do, but I put anti-seize on each one of these locations that I'm going to be bolting to these ball joints. Just because, if you remember in the first video of me taking this whole thing apart, especially this lower control arm, it was absolutely insane to get that ball joint out of the steering knuckle. So I have put a liberal amount of anti-seize in each one of those holes, and now I'm going to go ahead and get it loosely installed. Sorry about that, fellas. I thought that you could see that, but apparently not. It was out of shot. So I went ahead and did this upper control arm bolt as well. And right now we're just loosely getting everything snug in there. Alright, so right now everything is attached, and then on to the next part, which is going to be the hub and rotor assembly along with those wheel bearings. And we will be greasing those and putting those in very shortly. What's up, guys? It's future me, and you're probably wondering why I'm interrupting this part of the video. Well, you would be watching me put on this gasket, dust shield, and then eventually realize that I was doing that incorrectly, but still do it incorrectly because I'm going to put on the gasket against the steering knuckle, then the dust shield, and then the dust seal. I'm going to show you how it's supposed to be done right now. And let me tell you, you can look at a lot of different schematics online, and that's exactly what I did. But basically, I did it the way that I took it off of the vehicle. Now, that's to say that the person that did it before me did it incorrectly. And since the driver's side was the last side that I had taken apart, that's how I figured that they should go back together. But I was throwing away trash, and then I realized something while looking through the trash. Let me just show you. Alright, so I was getting ready to throw all of this stuff away, and then I realized something when I did. When I removed this, I saw that there was a gasket between it. Now obviously that's not how I put mine on, but I thought, oh wow, that's really bizarre. Because the driver's side, the gasket was on the back side. And I can put in a clip where it shows where you can see the gasket. And that's how I took it off, so that's how I put it back on. But apparently, on the passenger side, it was put on correctly. And as you can see on the back here, there's some rust, and there's just not a space that there would be for a gasket. However, that is the outline of the steering knuckle. And then on this side, you can see, well, maybe you can tell, but this, it's definitely the outline of the seal, but not a gasket. And you can see there's like crud and stuff in there. But on the passenger side, I don't know if you can tell, but it's a lot cleaner here. So that's where the gasket was sitting, and that is where it's supposed to sit. So at some point in time, at least the driver's side had been taken apart and somebody put the seal on incorrectly. So I'm going to show you how it should be done and then how it should be put back together. Alright, so let's put this thing on properly, shall we? And then not revisit this for quite some time. Alright, so first things first, you're going to want to place this in the correct position. Then our gasket's going to go on. And then after that comes our dust seal. A little tricky to get these lined up. Once you do, I'm going to go ahead and start one of the nuts to try to keep it in position. Just get it threaded in there. So hopefully it's a little bit easier to get these other ones put on. And then once you get all these in, these bolts are going to be torqued down to 13 foot-pounds. And now on to the rest of the video. Alright guys, before I go ahead and torque everything down, I'm going to use this handy dandy tool here that I got from Slee Off-Road or Slee 4x4 or whatever it's called. Basically what you do is you go ahead and screw it on here, and what it's going to do, once you pump the grease, it's going to go through these splines here and then go ahead and grease your spindle. What it says is what you're looking for is where the CV axle meets here to the back of the steering knuckle. Once you start to see that move a little bit, you can go ahead and stop pumping, and it is thoroughly greased. So I'm going to go ahead and screw this on here, start pumping, and grease the spindle. Alright, that should be it. You should have seen this move back just a little bit, and then once it did, we are finished. So spindle is now greased. Alright, next we're going to get the shock absorber, 135 foot-pounds. Alright, that is saying that is 135 foot-pounds. We'll take it. Alright, now we're going to be doing the lower control arm. To body bolts, these are 170 foot-pounds. And the reason that I did not, I don't know if you can see that, the reason that I did not connect this flange yet to this is because well, at least I had to have access to the other side over here and actually use a wrench to hold that in place while I torque this down, or else it just keeps spinning that. So just keep that in mind. You can do what you want, but I'm going to try it this way. I tried it the other way last time and it really sucked. So I'm going to do it this way. Go ahead and torque these down, 170 foot-pounds. Alright, so for the upper control arm, since we have this under tension, we're going to go ahead and torque those down, 72 foot-pounds of torque. And now for the upper control arm ball joint stud nut, that is going to be 81 foot-pounds. Alright, and you want to just make sure that you have enough room, because there should be a hole that you will then put your cotter pin in and then bend it into place. Alright, so now we want to tackle this lower control arm bolt. It's going to be 118 foot-pounds. I'll just say from doing the other side, it was well above 118 foot-pounds, just for the fact that 118 foot-pounds on this castle nut doesn't even get it to where you can see the hole to put the cotter pin in. Really, you could just take an impact to it, and two, you can see the cotter pin. I'm going to do it to 118. I'll probably switch over to the impact to get it tight enough to where I can get that pin in. Alright, so there is 118 foot-pounds, and I don't know if you can tell in the camera or not, but the threads aren't even down far enough, and you definitely can't see that hole yet. I'm going to go ahead and get the impact, and we're going to hit this thing until we can see that hole, just enough to get that cotter pin in, and then call this one a day. Alright guys, so this is where I'm at here. I had to undo the lower control arm bolts because it basically made everything too rigid and tight, so I could not get this back in position there. So even though having this off is great for being able to torque that bolt right there, which goes through the frame and the lower control arm, it's not great because then everything is torqued to where it's supposed to be and you can't get that reattached there. So I'm gonna go back up here to the upper control arm, undo those bolts as well, let off all the tension from that, and then see if that will allow this to lower enough to where I can put these bolts through. And I will bring you back hopefully when I am tightening up that flange to the torque arm there. All right, so everything is put back on, torqued, and I was able to get this. I basically had to undo every single thing to get the lower control arm to drop so I could get this flange on. So anyways, 2 bolts right there. I'm gonna torque them down to 166 foot-pounds, and then we're gonna move on to getting the hub, rotor, and wheel bearings put in. All right guys, so now is time to take the hub assembly, which I have a brand new hub assembly here, and the rotor, and join them together. Just in case you're wondering, here is the part number that I got for this hub assembly. Now the thing that I did not know about this, I thought that I was just getting the hub. And I did not know at the time, but this hub assembly, if you can see here, already comes with the races already installed. So they're already pressed in. So that's one less thing you have to do. And it also comes with the inner and outer wheel bearings. Also I have Stop Tech drilled and slotted rotors here. One thing I love about this is they make it dummy proof, front driver side. So what I'm going to do now is mate the rotor with the hub. One thing you do want to be careful of, you have this, I think it's a ABS ring. You just want to be careful of that, not to damage that. Let's just slide over ever so gently like so. All right, so the holes are lined up. These were the bolts that came out originally. So I'm just gonna thread them in there loosely. All 5 of them. All right guys, so my camera died as I was explaining that to you, but basically I've gone ahead and snugged down all 5 of those bolts. They're 17 millimeters, and now I'm gonna torque them down to 54 foot-pounds. If you had a vise or something, that would be great for you to put this in. I do not, so I'm just gonna hold on to this rotor and let my wife torque all these down 54 foot-pounds, and then we'll get started on the wheel bearings. All right guys, so before I go ahead and start packing the wheel bearings, I just wanted to show you this real quick. So if you can see down here into the hub, you have, this is going to be the outer ring or race. But you should see these little notches there. So this is what it looks like, obviously with a very clean hub. But this is probably what yours looks like if you just took it out of the vehicle. So as you can see, it's just like heavily greased, and usually probably black grease, and you just can't see anything. But under all that grease, you have these little notches, and it's going to be the same way here on the inner, on the other side as well. So basically what you would do if you're going to reuse your hub and put in new races and bearings, you would clean all that grease out, and then you would take a brass punch and get in behind on each one of these and just go around and banging it with a hammer until you finally freed those races up. And then once that's complete, you clean everything back up, and then you'd press in your new races until they set on the back of those lips right there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make sure my gloves are clean. I'm going to get some grease, and I'm going to go ahead and grease the inside of this. Now you're going to grease the inside of this till it meets this lip here. So all this area here and behind to the wall is going to be greased all the way around. Alright, so basically as it sounds, I'm going to take a good amount of grease and I'm going to start packing it in there. And just know you're probably going to have to go through a couple pairs of gloves doing all this. We're just going to keep getting this grease and packing it in there. Now, it doesn't really matter if you get it on the races because, well, the wheel bearings are going to go right on top of that and they're going to be all greased up. So, alright, so that is pretty much covered in there. Maybe just a little bit more. I probably have overdone it just a little bit, but I would rather there be a little more grease in there than not enough. So as you can see, it's already on our race here. I'm just going to smooth that out. Alright, and now we can start packing our inner wheel bearing. If you're wondering, the grease that I'm using is Redline CV2. I've heard good things about it. I bought 2 of these 14-ounce containers, and I've pretty much gone through 1 whole container so far with doing the passenger side, and just what I've done here. This is the inner bearing that came with the hub kit, and if you can see right here, there's a Timken, and I believe the other one is Koyo. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a handful of that grease, and I like to start with the larger side here to really pack it in there. But basically we're going to come down and just keep packing like this until we start seeing it coming out the top. And they do make tools for this, but you know, if you just have a nice chill afternoon, it's actually kind of relaxing. So if you can see right there, it's already starting to come out the top. So that's what you want. You want it to come out all the way around, and once that is complete, what I like to do is I actually like to flip it over and do it out the other side as well, just to make sure you have everything nice and packed in there. And then once all that is lubed up, I will go ahead and place it on top of the race. Alright, so after I get this one completed, I'll bring you back when I'm ready to put it in and install the oil seal. Alright guys, so as you can see, it gets pretty messy packing this, but I went on both sides, and then once I was coming up from the bottom, you can start seeing the little bubbles coming out up here, which lets me know that it is packed all the way. So I'm just going to leave all this grease on there, and I'm just going to set it right here in that race. Alright, and if you want to, just take the extra grease, you can just throw it on in there. And then what I'm going to do after this is clean up and go get that oil seal, and then we will put it on top of this and have it in place. Alright, so here we have the oil seal, and then there's already some grease there, so this should just help get it going. But we're going to put it in there, try to get it as level as possible by hand. Now I get my block of wood with a shop towel on it, just set it on top as level as possible, and then we're just going to help it in place. Alright, and then after you get that in place, you just want to make sure that it's a nice flush seal, which this one is, and that's why I like using a block of wood that covers the whole surface. So since everything looks nice and smooth at this time, I'm just going to clean up around the top here, and then also brake clean this side of the rotor, and then we'll flip it over, and then go ahead and put in the front wheel bearing. Alright, I put the outer wheel bearing in already. Sorry I didn't show you putting that in, but my hands were pretty greasy. That is the one thing I'd say about doing this job. Make sure you have a lot of gloves, towels, brake clean, whatever you need. We will be cleaning up this surface once we get it onto the vehicle, because there is a gasket that needs to go on here. The next thing that we are going to do to get this ready to put on the vehicle is we have to put on these little studs for the flange. If you would have seen the first episode in this series of taking everything apart, you would have seen that I had some issues with these studs, and specifically getting the conical pieces off of these studs. So what I did is I beat the ends of these pretty hard and pretty much mushroomed them out where they couldn't be used again. However, I didn't know this at the time, but even if you have to do that in order to get the flange off and basically to save the hub, which I screwed up my first hub, and that's why I bought 2 new ones, but these can be replaced. Not to say that they wouldn't be a little difficult to get out of here, because who knows how long, probably since factory, that they've been in, but these can be replaced. So that's just something to think about if you're having trouble with getting the nut off and the conical piece that goes over top of these with the flange. Just know that these can be replaced. So if you have to beat them with a a hammer or whatever it is to get that flange off, to be able to even access all this, they can be replaced. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put these all in, and then we'll go put it on the vehicle. As you can see here, I already greased up this part of the knuckle. So we're gonna go ahead and put it on. Just be careful when you put it on, the front or the outer wheel bearing has a tendency to want to pop out. So just know that putting it on, try to put it on as straight as possible. Even then, it might still pop out, but hopefully it only happens at the end, and then we can put the lock washer on and get this thing set up. Well, for some reason this one is being stubborn. The other one took a little bit of time, but then popped right in. I don't know why this one's not going straight on. And there goes the front wheel bearing. There we go. So I'm gonna go clean up this front wheel bearing, grease it up a little bit more. And because we did pick up a little dirt there, so that's the last thing we want. So I'm going to clean this up, and then we'll pop it back in, and I'll show you how to do the lock nut, and then setting the preload on this. Alright guys, finally cleaned that back up and put that back on. Alright, so you got this little washer here. There's going to be a groove. You're going to find that groove, and you're going to push that bad boy in just like that. Then you're going to take one of these, you're going to slide that on, and you're going to need this big guy. What you're going to do, you're just going to keep screwing that on, and then we're going to torque it down to 43 foot-pounds. Alright, there's 43 foot-pounds. So now what you're going to want to do, since you have that 43 foot-pounds, take some nice clean gloves, because the last thing you want to do is put grease on your brand new rotor, especially after we've cleaned it. You're just going to move it. You're just going to kind of let the bearings set. And there should be no play in this whatsoever. So you just keep going around. Make sure this is nice and happy. Nothing's binding, everything's nice and smooth. And then we're going to back it off. So now since that's been set, now we're just going to back it off. Alright, so the pressure's been taken off. Should move more freely now. And what we're going to do now is we're going to get our gauge. We're going to make sure this is nice and level with the ground. We're going to make sure this is at 90 degrees. And then we're going to pull and see what our pounds are, or our preload is going to be before this thing starts to move. I believe the book says it wants the preload between 9.5 and 15 pounds. Alright guys, so we got it pretty much where we want. We got it at 90 degrees. And all I'm going to use, I don't even think this is a fish scale. You can get them, but we're just going to use this down here. It's in pounds. You can see that. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to just attach it here. You want to be at that 90-degree angle, and you're just going to pull. So right there, I think, I don't know, 6 pounds maybe. So what we're going to do now is we're going to tighten up that nut just a little bit. All right, and every time I tighten it, I just like to go a couple revolutions so get everything back to 0. Depending on what tightness you finally get this and the preload at, you also want to make sure there's no play in the hub assembly and the wheel bearing. Because even though you might be like at 9.5, you want to make sure that this isn't moving, because obviously if it is, you're going to have to tighten that up a little bit more. So this is what we're going to keep doing. We're going to keep going back and forth until we get this thing between 9.5 and 15. So that was 4 pounds right there. All right, so we're going to tighten it up just a little bit more. I'm just going to spin it around. And then you also, once you do this, you want to go in the direction of travel. So you're going to be going towards the front of the vehicle. Hook it back up. Again, it's about 4 pounds. So I'm just going to keep doing this and until I get it set. And then once I get it set, I will show you the number we ended up on. And I think I pretty much got it where I want here. I know you probably can't see the gauge very well, but I'll tell you what it says once we start to move. So that was about 10 pounds right there to get that to move. So like I said, as long as it's between that 9.5, 15 pounds. I mean, I guess if you wanted even snugger, you could get close to that 15 pounds. But I've already done it a couple times and feel pretty good with it. We'll just do it here one more time. You just want to pull nice and slow. Yeah, so that's a little over 10 pounds right there. So I'm going to check here. Yep. No play whatsoever. All right, so I think that is good, and let's go ahead and complete assembly of this. All right, so next up, we're going to put this guy in. As you can see, it has a little notch here. It's going to line up with this notch over on this side, just like so. Then we want to get our other nut, and we're going to go ahead and place that on. And then we're going to torque this one down to 47 foot-pounds. All right, and then torque it 47 foot-pounds. It is torque 47 foot-pounds. And so I made a mistake yesterday. And what I mean by that is, at this point in time, I put that little star fitting on before the last nut goes on. And after I torqued that last nut, I forgot to go and bend the tabs back and forward over the locking nut and the adjusting nut. So I'm going to go ahead and let the video play here. You'll see me torque it, and then I will show you what it was supposed to be done. So I'll just kind of splice that in. Learn from my mistakes, people. That actually didn't take very long to get to this point, especially with those conical bolts, and you'll see that later on, but I used some anti-seize on it, so it actually helped. But these little tabs, these are the ones that we're talking about right here. So you're just going to find where one will flatly go over one end to the first nut, and then we're going to bend another one out this way towards us. So I think we'll do this one here. Just kind of bend that tab towards us. And then for the other one, and for the back nut, we'll use this one right here. It looks like it'll be fine for it. All right, so that's gonna be it. We got one going back, one going forward. And now, on with the rest of the video. Now, we can go ahead and clean all this up and prepare it to be mated to the flange. All right, so here's the flange gasket. All right, just make sure that's nice and flush. Now we can put on the flange. Where these little knobs are up, that should be where you see these, whatever they're called, dowel pins. That's it. That's where the dowel pins are. Alright, looks like that's going on. There we go. What I'm going to do now is put some anti-seize on each one of these. They're going to go in their respective holes. Then we're going to put the nuts on and torque them down. I'm just rubbing a little bit of anti-seize on these. If you remember from the first video, these things were absolutely horrible to get off. So if I ever have to do this job again, hopefully making this a little bit easier on myself. So those guys are in. Now to put on the bolts and washers. Alright, now to torque these all down to 24 foot-pounds. Alright, now for us to put on our snap ring, and then dust cap, and we're finished. Now maybe you guys have a better way of putting these on. I use these on the other side, struggled a little bit, but was finally able to get it. There we go. I think that actually set the first time, which is amazing. What I'm going to do here though, is I'm just going to pull on that CV axle, kind of pull it forward a little bit, and just make sure that ring is completely set. Alright, I'm just going to set this in place. And then I'm going to take my dead blow hammer here, knock it on, and then we're done. Well, I say that, almost done. After we get this on, then we got to put the outer tie rod back in, torque it down. Alright, outer tie rod bolt is in. Then we're going to torque it down to 90 foot-pounds. Alright, we're just going to turn it a little bit more to line up the holes for the cotter pin. We'll be all set. We just got it lined up right there. We're going to throw a cotter pin in it and then call this job done. Alright guys, so check it out. Got the caliper and a new brake line attached. Caliper bolts to attach to that are 90 foot-pounds, and on the back side of this is an ABS sensor, and the bolt for that I believe is 71 inch-pounds. And then also you have the AHC height control up here, and the 10mm bolt on that is torqued to 49 inch-pounds. Alright guys, that is going to do it for this video. I hope that you found it helpful and informative. And like always, I went ahead and did the research to do the work on this vehicle. Please do not take anything I say for gospel, because I am not a mechanic, but please just use this as a guide if you're going to be doing this type of work on your vehicle. But I hope that this content does help you in case you are trying to attempt to do something like this job and it steers you in the right direction. And if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there's a lot more content coming on the LX470. And as always, thank you for watching.